Howdy, everybody. Welcome to Highly Questionable Marketing, joined by the lovely and always Jurgen. Jurgen, how's it going?
It's going well.
Okay. I can feel that sickness you got because I'm feeling it too, so you might hear some coughs.
I'm on the
You're gonna
tail
hear
end.
stuffed
I'm
up.
on the tail end. This cold is. I'm kicking this thing, man. I'm shaking it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we caught the cold, and we want to go straight into talking about creating demand because,
Woo.
man, this shit's everywhere right now. Everybody's talking about creating demand, creating demand. That's the key to your strategy. You create content, you educate, and over time you start creating demand and shit like that, right? And I used to message around the same thing a year and a half ago, and I I think I really want to talk about, can you actually create demand in marketing? Can you actually take someone and create demand? And does that give you exponential growth? Because the other thing that fucking happens, you get on this create demand bandwagon, right? And you start selling this to your executive team, and they're like, oh, cool, this sounds really good. Like, who the fuck doesn't want to create demand? Like, I want to create demand. But then, right, you start doing it, your inbound volume goes up, things are kind of looking good, you're getting more demos, and then all of a sudden shit plateaus, right? And everybody's going to look around like, well, why aren't we creating more demand? Because that's kind of what happens. If you buy into the idea that you're creating demand, it should continually go up because you're continually creating more and more demand. And I actually think it's becoming a trap because I don't think you can create as much demand as you think you can. And I think what a lot of marketers are getting stuck into, or companies are, they're in a category yet. The category itself is growing, and they're switching their strategy to this idea that they think they are creating demand. And what's really happening is their new strategies allowing them to capture demand a little bit better in a category that's growing. So they get this false sense that they have marketing that's creating demand when they're really just capturing it. What do you think?
Guess that's how you feel, huh?
That's how I feel.
Well, I think that's valid. The conversation is everywhere, right? Before I try to answer the perhaps rhetorical, perhaps not rhetorical question of can you actually create demand, I will just say this. My biggest beef with this conversation is that we're saying create demand and capture demand in the same breath as if they are, that they require the same amount of effort, that they are, you just capture demand and then you also create demand. Like, it's easy, it's talked about as if it's like really that simple, like, oh, you just got to do this, this, and this, and then you create demand. So whether you can or cannot, let's assume for a second you can, I would be the first one to say, if anybody's telling you it's easy, I would be concerned, right? That's my first thing. I also think the point about categories, or just sort of like, there's also something about time, right? And so, like, yeah, I think we trick ourselves to believe that we are somehow creating demand. And I think that as marketers, it's great for our ego to suggest that we are putting stuff out there that is in fact making people feel a need that they previously didn't feel, right? But this is so nuanced, and this is where, like, theory and academically speaking, and people who aren't actually like in it, and people who have an agenda, like, it's just like a little too easy to talk about it. And I just know from experience, I mean, I'm not particularly successful, but I got about 15 years of B2B marketing, largely in SaaS, behind me, and I've never found it easy to create demand. So I guess that's where I'm coming from as an intro here to set the stage.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to pin you down. Do you think you can create demand? I just want to ask you the question straight up. Can marketing create demand? Ooh, I'm putting you on the spot. You're nervous. I feel it.
You absolutely can create demand. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely can create demand. I would not be a marketer if I didn't believe that.
Okay.
And great marketers do. But like you said, there's two things, two asterisks next to that. One is you can't create as much demand as you think you can, certainly not in the time frame you would want to believe that this demand can be created. And number two, I don't think we are talking about how that happens in the right way. Like, let's take a couple of examples, right? Let's say you are operating in a highly, highly commoditized space. You're selling a product that there's like a million options, and you're trying to create demand for your product, right? And then on the flip side, let's take another example where you truly have something unique. You are a category of one, if you will, and you're out there trying to, create demand for what you got. Is the work the same? Is it like start pushing content into dark social? Like, are the tactics the same for both? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Is the effort, like the push, is that going to be the same? Is the timeline or the results going to be the same? I don't know. And what I'm really getting at here is that what does it take, right? Like, what would it really take if you're a buyer and somebody's getting in front of you and you do not feel like you have an actual need that you're ready to take action on for whatever the fuck they have? Then what would it take for you to get to that point, right? Like, some content, a couple of podcast episodes. Let's get real.
I'm with you on this. So, like, the create demand thing, can you create demand? Yes, in the general sense. I think you can create some. I think what's happening is you got a lot of marketing leaders right now that are signing up for this idea of creating demand. They're switching kind of like out of the old playbook. They are building awareness. They're doing the distribution bullshit, all that stuff. And it's really capturing demand better than before. And they're getting that false sense that they're creating it, right? When they never have, but then they're selling that to their executive team that they're creating demand, I think, essentially. And then what that is, that's setting up every CMO that's buying into this idea that they can go out and infinitely create demand and just keep going and keep scaling it and keep going. And it's going to plateau because they don't have the right story. They're actually not creating demand. They don't have that narrative thing that we talk about and things like that. And they're just overstating how much demand can really be created. Like, it's not where it just exponentially grows unless you're in a growing category. Like, we're fooling ourselves and thinking, like, if that's not part of the equation that's happening, there's only so much you can actually do. If your category is not really growing or it's like flat, right? Like, you really are limited to how much you're going to get that shit to go up, I think. And that's really not part of the discussion that a lot of people are talking about in what they're doing. Like, I believe to truly create demand, you have to have a fairly large ICP to go out and do this with and have the right fucking story, which most people do not. They're just like, they don't have any of that foundational stuff in place to actually really create demand. At the level people are talking about, they're reading, right, the LinkedIn post, right, they're reading the stuff, they're equating it to different tactics they're going to do, which is the bullshit. Create content, distribute in the feed organically. Now don't even look for clicks, just look at ad impressions, right? And then watch your inbound volume go up, dark social, all that stuff. And it's like, hey, you just bought into a bunch of bullshit under the guise of you're creating demand.
Let me ask you a two-part question about a company we bring up sometimes. And it's not Drift.
I thought it was.
No. So let's take Gong. Is their incredible growth largely due to them creating demand? Or is it largely due to the revenue intelligence category that they created growing? And are the two the same in that situation?
Yeah, so I'm going to maybe actually take a step back and say neither. You put me on the spot, by the way, guys. Everybody on this podcast, this wasn't even fucking planned.
Hey,
Jurgen's trying to,
actually,
like,
quick timeout. Quick timeout. Rant time. Okay, Jurgen's rant.
Okay.
What I fucking hate about the few podcasts I listen to is when they are actually scripted. So, Jay, let me ask you a question. Oh, Jurgen, that's a great question. I had no idea you were going to ask me that. Well, here's the pre-rehearsed answer that I've gone through about 10 times. Like
Yeah.
this dumb ass shit that we are doing as content creators or whatever we want to think of ourselves as, where we just
Yep.
like are just like acting out some like
Yep.
this is a dialogue podcast. We are two marketers
Yep.
talking about this shit. Yeah, no, this shit we
Or
just
talking
we
shit.
decided we're going to talk about this thing about creating demand. So there it is. Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just threw the shit at you.
So let's talk about Gong for a second. What if I took a step back and really thought of it through the lens of like they devised their growth strategy, the thing we've talked about a few times now, right? What I really think happened, they created a great fucking product, right? And they built a word of mouth engine that, dude, they're fucking everywhere, right? I don't think transparently the category had much to do with it. I don't think the other things had much to do with it. I think they found a need in the fucking market. I think they created a killer ass product, and everybody talks that shit across sales, marketing, product, and their word of mouth game is so fucking strong. It's ridiculous. And that's for me how they created demand, in the sense of like they just captured demand so insanely well. They could have called that whatever they wanted. The category didn't matter to me. I think they just had the great product with the right need to the right buyers, and it caught like wildfire and created a word of mouth system across social that worked really well for them.
Okay, so part two of the
Am I wrong?
question. So I told you it was a two-parter. Part two of the question is
Oh fuck.
take that and say, how much of that can your typical marketer apply to their situation relative to this discussion of create demand? 0, 100%, or somewhere in between?
Way lower. So here's the thing. Like Gong's been around a while now, right? Look, what they pulled off is getting harder to pull off because building the best product now is very difficult. They have such a leg up in in I'm going to say the word fucking category, even though what I said, right? Now there is a category behind it and stuff, which is great. But like to build the best product now doesn't matter to buyers. Like to get to that level is nearly impossible. Like it is so hard to do. You got to get lucky as a marketing team or leader to get into a company like that. Like you just got to get lucky. They're just not everywhere. Most people have an average product. It's crowded with hundreds or at least tens of already solutions. That's the battle for the average marketer, right? Like that's the battle.
Yeah.
That's what I think happened. They like look, some of this, everybody wants to say great marketing, all that stuff. Some of it's just getting lucky. Right product, right time, right buyer, right pain. COVID accelerated it. All that shit happened. Like, let's not. Yes, are
Okay.
they awesome at what they
Yeah,
do?
not here.
100%. I
Yeah.
will never knock Gong. Like it's fucking awesome. But let's not. There's a little luck in some of this. Let's be fucking real. Like,
Well, I'm not here to argue with you about that answer, but I agree with the point about there is some luck in some of this stuff. There's also the insight early on, and like it's sort of getting some of the early things right, to get you the advantage. Anyway, the point is really more this.
well, hold on. I want to say one thing though before you make your point. Maybe your point should have been made first. I'm a jerk, I guess. I'm sorry.
You're like, hey, Jurgen, I'm gonna let you finish, but Beyonce had the
Yeah.
best album. No, I'm just kidding.
So look, the only reason I know about the Gong narrative actually is because of Andy Raskin. I don't think Gong goes out to market with their narrative, in my opinion. Like very little. They go out with that data and shit like that in their product, in my opinion. I do not believe they actually go to market with their narrative. I think they tried to create a category with the Gartner angle. They didn't really, in my opinion. Yeah, did they? And I think Andy Raskin gets us to see it. Props to him. But beyond that, would you know their narrative? Would you think they had one?
I think the most interesting thing in what you're saying there is that the bold stuff that they do doesn't at least directly reflect the narrative and doesn't directly talk so much about the category either. So most people probably wouldn't pick up on that. I don't know how they sell the stuff, like I've never been on a,
Yeah.
Gong sales call, been on the receiving end of that. But it's an interesting point. Look, I do think the narrative played a bigger role than you probably give it credit, but your point is interesting, and I'll give you that. But here's really the thing. if you are a SaaS company and you're looking at examples like this, right? Because that's what we all do, and that's what the echo chamber out there is sort of amplifying too. Everybody's kind of looking to this stuff. Oh, I wonder what I can pick up from there. And like these guys over here seem to be talking about creating demand. And of course, we got to bring up Refine here too. And like, oh yeah, look at what they did with their podcast and stuff like that. No matter what you're looking at, I think to believe that you can just sort of copy and paste some programs to create demand is like really, really dangerous. And I think to your earlier point about setting CMOs and marketing teams up for massive failure, like this is what is happening. Like I don't think the intention is for that to happen, but that is what's happening from how this is being talked about. I'm upset about the fact that there's this whole community, yeah, B2B marketing community, here we go. There's this whole community that just wants to echo all this stuff. Yeah, you capture demand, you create demand. That's how you do it. Just then the CMO is going to be asked. Like how are you creating demand this week, Johnny?
And I kind of hate, like, I hate to say this. It kind of feels like talking down to you if you don't get it, right? Well, what do you mean you're not creating demand? Like,
Oh,
you
you're
don't
not
get how to
creating
create
demand?
Yeah.
Oh,
Like, that's your problem.
wow.
Like,
Yeah, no wonder you're struggling. Whew.
yeah,
You're
you're
not,
too busy trying to capture.
you're only
Like,
capturing demand. You're not creating demand. Oh, sorry, I asked. Whew.
right? Like, I know what your problem is, right? Like, duh, why'd you
Hey,
just start creating it? What are you
hey
doing?
guys, this dude over here, he's not even creating demand.
It's like a fucking club, man. It's just a
Yeah.
club for
You're
people.
not
If
in
you're
the
not
creating
creating it,
demand
you're
club?
out.
Shit,
Yeah.
man. I'm sorry. You can't see how you can hate from outside of the club though. You can't even get in.
And you know what though? What I think, like, it's funny because I've done the narrative shit. I feel like I've had a good one, and I know what happens, right? And am I creating demand in the sense of yes and no, right? What really happened, as we talked about a little bit, is this narrative thing we talk about and the category and shit is like to truly create demand. Like you literally have to take someone, in my opinion, non-existent of their pain and the shifts and things like that, and run that whole journey, right? When really what we've talked about is, I think it is more of a capture demand game than people want to admit, which is what we talked about, which is like when we talk about narrative, and we wrote about this on LinkedIn a little bit ago. It's like the buyer kind of already has these suspicions in their mind, right? So, and if they do, right, when you're talking about creating demand and something new to them,
Yeah.
right, they're kind of like already feeling it a little bit, okay? And I really do
Yeah,
believe
I
that.
got
Like
I got
they're
to jump in
feeling
here,
it.
man. When you're talking
Okay.
B2B marketing and you're talking creating demand, you're not taking somebody from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
They're starting somewhere. So, are you
Yeah.
creating the demand or are you like further facilitating people's journey towards having that? Like we got to get real about this stuff. We like to give ourselves a lot of credit as marketers, don't we? Oh, we're creating demand from scratch. This is artisanally crafted, all natural ingredients, purely from scratch, homemade like your grandma. Like this isn't that. You're talking about an audience in most cases that is generally fairly educated, generally has some thought about what's going on in their world, and you're coming in and yeah, you're trying to take them from believing what they're currently believing to believing something slightly different. You're trying to tap into maybe a hunch that they already have, and you're kind of nurturing that train of thought and adding to it, and you're getting people to say, yeah. And then in parallel too, you actually as a business get to the point where you have the need and can justify the purchase. So like you can't give
Yeah.
100% of the credit to like this creating demand action that you're running, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yes, we are totally overstating because, right, if we're talking mid-market enterprise B2B SaaS company, you're not fucking going in there and just convincing someone to spend 50K, but you know what I mean? Like, but that's what people are acting like. Like, we created this demand. They're fucking just opening up their wallet now because of this distribution we're doing. Like, it doesn't work like that. Like let's be real here. And that's maybe where I'm getting at. Like, in the general sense, we're all only capturing demand. Now, yes, should you go out to the 95% of buyers and do something that facilitates kind of as they get that inkling? Yes, do not ignore on this. We are not saying ignore them. But let's be real. You're not taking 20% of them and shifting them into demand and fucking driving all this revenue, right? Like, let's just be real.
Hey man, it's so funny, right? Like we are arriving at something that we didn't have before this. Again, difference between this podcast and other podcasts, we don't have some sort of like, yeah, and then I'm going to say this and you say this and then exactly we arrive at this. Yeah, and people will think it's real in real time. No, but like what we're getting to is this, I think. You check me if I'm wrong on this. Shit, what was I going to say? I just looked at something that caught my attention. By the way, have you ever experienced this product?
No, but I want
If
to
you are
the
listening and
Cakesters.
not watching, shame on you. Oreo Cakesters, the soft version of an Oreo. I don't eat carbs and sugar, but I'm buying this for my friends who do, some friends in the
Sure.
motherland. This product right here, yeah, I don't know how they created demand. Other than that, they made something that looks delicious. Okay, back to the point. I think the point was this. It's so black and white in what people are saying, and it's so binary, and it's so simple, and it's so this, and it's so that. Oh, well, why are you only talking to the, either 2, 3, 4, or 5% of the markets that are ready to buy? You're only capturing, what about the remaining 95 or plus, percent of people? And then you're saying that when you are going to the 95% of the market with your marketing, you are creating demand. And so when any percentage of that 95% ends up in the funnel, into pipeline, ultimately into revenue, you are saying that what did it was you created the demand.
Yeah, interesting. Because essentially what we'd be saying then, right, is it's not, you're no longer playing the game of 3%, 5%. You're making the percentage bigger of in market buyers, right? So there'd be 5, 6, 7, which means now only 80% of your market's not, like,
Yeah.
bullshit. Bullshit. Just bullshit.
And look, I mean, I may not have bought Drift in multiple places had they not spoken to me the way they did years before I ended up buying it. So, in a way, yeah, they created demand. You could say, you could check that off. And, like, if you want to, in the world where, there's a war on attribution, you can attribute the work to creating demand, but you could also say, you told a great story. You built
Yep.
bias towards this product because of what was put out there. You created a
Yep.
relationship, a connection, something that mattered.
Ooh.
And I felt some kind of way. And so when it was time for me to potentially buy something like this, I knew where I was going. You can
I
call it
love
create
it.
demand if you want to, but if you call it that and you get people repeating that and you got people like running plays accordingly, just start a podcast. Just put this out. Start a community. All the stuff, then you're kind of missing what is actually needed in order to move somebody, right? Like you're still talking about like changing hearts and minds here. Like it's the same shit.
Yeah.
It's just that now we have this cute, phrase that we can use,
Yep.
and now we can go all the way with it. And look, what do you know? People are eating shit up.
So one more thing I want to talk about as we end this, because you mentioned the drift thing, and they're always a great example. They had a great narrative, and I do think, in the general sense, I've talked to people when they were talking, right? Like, we're really bought into that conversational marketing thing, right? Like, I fucking heard that from people straight up. But let me ask you a different question, right? You said you bought it a few times, but did you ever go in there and they're like, "Oh, they're using intercom. Well, we're displacing them for drift immediately." You know what I mean? Like, was there solutions in place? And I think that's kind of like some what we're talking about. Like, there was a
Hmm.
need, right? Drift built that bias that you
Hmm.
said, right? Where he was like, well, I'm going to just choose
Yeah,
drift,
I
right?
fuck with
And
drift.
that's
Like that. That's it.
so, like,
That's the energy.
your the in market never got bigger. They just captured more of the in market, right? And then if you have a growing category on top of it, That's how they're getting their growth. They're growing, the category's growing, um, and then that's capturing and making their pie appear bigger because they're capturing the largest percentage of that category.
Yeah, before we start dropping mics and saying we have all the answers and we just like demystified and like, let's just say like, yeah, I don't know, but like, I think you're probably right about your position on categories are growing and you're capturing more of it and you're doing, guess what? You're doing marketing. You're marketing to people that aren't necessarily ready to buy tomorrow, you know?
Yep.
What
Love
else
it.
do you want to say about
So,
this though? Like let's throw in one more nugget, right? What else is there to say about create demand versus capture demand? Give the people something good, Jay.
oh, fuck, dude. Why would you put me on the spot? Like, it's like the fourth time in this one you
Uh-huh.
put me on the spot. Look, maybe I'll end it like this. I don't want to sit here and say, in the general sense, that like creating demand isn't a thing in the general sense, right? I just think it's overstating what's really happening under this like idea of a really cool buzzword. And I just want people to leave with that. Yes, is there a percentage of people that are one, early adopters? Can you create demand from them? Yes, but that percentage is super fucking small. Okay. That is one thing. If there's early adopters, you have a hot new product with this killer narrative, that's a great way to go get them, right? Like that thing does happen 100%, right? Um, I think the only other thing is to piggyback, like if you are on this create demand thing, the only way I know how to do it is through a fucking narrative. You gotta get the story right. And just don't overstate, right? Like I've watched narratives, I've done a bunch of them now, and what really happens is that's that inkling thing, right? You're confirming a suspicion a buyer already has about things. So just ask yourself, if that's the case, really, are we creating demand or are we capturing it?